Welcome, dear listener. If you enjoy these chilling tales, please subscribe for more horror. Now, let's begin. It was the last week of August when Hannah agreed to spend a few nights at her uncle's lake house before heading back to college. The property sat on the edge of a fading summer community in Vermont, where cabins closed up after Labor Day and the nights grew unnervingly quiet. She liked the idea of a few days alone, time to read, sketch, and gather her thoughts before the semester began. The house itself was old, with warped wooden floors, faded wallpaper, and a screened porch that creaked when you leaned on it. Out back, the lake stretched like a sheet of black glass, reflecting the last orange smears of sunset. The first night was peaceful enough. Hannah made herself dinner, sat out on the porch, and listened to the cicadas winding down. The neighbors across the narrow lane had already left for the season. Their shutters were closed tight, their driveways empty. She realized quickly that the whole cul-de-sac was deserted, every cabin sealed up. Only her uncle's place remained open, standing like an intruder among boarded-up windows and padlocked doors. She brushed off the unease. Silence was what she wanted, after all. But sometime after midnight, when the moonlight spilled across the water and the trees hissed softly in the breeze, Hannah awoke to the sound of footsteps on the porch. She froze in bed, heart drumming, telling herself it was only an animal. Raccoons, maybe. She listened harder and realized it wasn't the scuttling of paws, but the deliberate creak of weight pressing down on wood. A slow pacing rhythm, back and forth, back and forth. She swallowed and got up, peering through the thin curtains. The porch was empty. The lake shimmered undisturbed. And yet the creaking continued, right outside the front screen door, though no one was there. She pulled the curtain tighter and forced herself back into bed, staying awake until dawn filtered in through the trees. The next day she told herself she must have dreamt it, some lingering edge of a nightmare. She went down to the dock with her sketchbook, trying to shake off the memory. But her pencil wouldn't settle on the page. She kept glancing up, certain someone was watching from the tree line across the lake. The air seemed too still, the forest too silent, as if the entire landscape held its breath. That night, she locked every door and window before turning in. Yet the moment she drifted into a thin, fragile sleep, the sound returned. The same steady steps moving across the porch, pausing, then pressing against the door as if testing it. Hannah sat up in bed, whispering to herself to stay calm. She forced herself to peek again, pulling the curtain aside. Once more, nothing. But this time, as her eyes adjusted, she saw faint condensation on the outside of the screen door. A patch of fogged moisture, as if someone had been standing there, breathing steadily, their face pressed close, her chest tightened. She grabbed her phone to call her uncle, but the screen showed no service. Not even one bar. She tried anyway, pacing the floor, but the calls refused to go through. By morning, the condensation was gone. The third day was restless. Hannah could barely eat, barely think. She tried driving into town for supplies and maybe to use Wi-Fi, but her uncle's old car wouldn't start. The engine sputtered once and died, though it had worked fine when she arrived. Frustrated, she returned inside, where the air felt heavier, like the walls themselves held secrets. She tried to distract herself with a book, but her eyes kept flicking toward the porch. She swore she saw a shadow pass across it, quick as a blink, though no one was there. When night came, dread settled into her bones. She lit every lamp in the house and kept the television running just for noise. Still, around midnight, the power cut out. The lamps died. The screen went black. The house was plunged into silence so complete it rang in her ears. Then the footsteps returned, this time heavier, closer, slow, dragging steps across the porch. Hannah backed into the hallway clutching a flashlight, her breath trembling. The beam shook as she aimed it at the front door. Through the screen, she caught the faintest glimpse of movement, a figure standing still, tall, its face pressed against the mesh. For only an instant she saw it, pale skin, eyes too large, lips pulled into something between a grin and a grimace. Then the beam flickered, the batteries drained, and the image was gone. She screamed, stumbling backward, tripping over the rug. When she scrambled up again and dared to look, the porch was empty, but the screen door was ajar. The next day, Hannah considered leaving on foot. The nearest neighbor, though absent, was only half a mile away. Maybe she could find a landline, or at least some sign of another person. But when she stepped outside, the world seemed subtly altered. The air smelled of rot, though no leaves had yet fallen. The lake, once bright and reflective, now looked murky, almost black, its surface rippling, though no wind stirred. The forest loomed darker, branches like claws. She turned back, deciding she couldn't walk into that silence. Better to wait for her uncle's return in 2 days. She could make it 2 days. She thought she could. That night was the worst yet. The footsteps didn't just circle the porch, they entered the house. She heard them on the stairs, each creak deliberate, closer to her bedroom. She barricaded the door with a chair, clutching a kitchen knife in shaking hands. The knob twisted. She bit her tongue to keep from sobbing aloud. Something pressed against the door with slow persistence, as if testing her strength. Then just as suddenly the pressure lifted. Silence fell. When she dared to move the chair aside and crack the door, she saw muddy footprints leading down the hall, dark smears across the floorboards. They ended at the back door, which now hung wide open to the night. Exhaustion dragged her into an uneasy sleep on the couch, knife still in her grip. She dreamed of the lake, dreamed of standing waist deep in the black water, unable to move, while pale hands tugged her deeper. She awoke, gasping, sweat pouring down her face, and from the porch, she heard it, a whisper, barely audible but undeniable. Her name. Drawn out, low and hoarse. Hannah, Hannah. She bolted upright, staring at the door. The whisper repeated, closer this time. Hannah. She covered her ears, screaming for it to stop, but the sound seeped through the walls, inside her head, vibrating through her teeth. She could feel it crawling under her skin, inside her veins. The next morning she found the lake dock destroyed. The boards had been ripped upward, nails twisted and bent, as though something had clawed its way out of the water. The footprints in the dirt were wrong, longer than human, toes stretched too far. She packed her bag, deciding to leave on foot no matter what. But when she reached the lane, every cabin stood different somehow. The shutters hung at angles, doors stood open though she knew they'd been locked. Inside each, the furniture was overturned, windows cracked, as if the houses had been abandoned in chaos, not orderly packed away for the season. And worse, every mirror she passed in those cabins was shattered, shards scattered across the floors. Yet in one sliver of glass, Hannah swore she saw not her own face but that same pale figure from the porch grinning at her. She ran back to her uncle's house, desperate, heart splitting in her chest. The sun set, shadows stretched. The night came again. This time the footsteps did not begin outside. They started inside, right at the foot of her bed. It was the last weekend before September when Daniel and his 3 closest friends drove out to the old fairgrounds on the edge of town. The place had been shut down for nearly a decade, left to rot after a series of unexplained accidents. Some claimed the land was cursed, others whispered about missing workers, freak machinery malfunctions, and a fire that swept through the Midway in the summer of 2011. Officially, the county just cited financial collapse and safety violations, but locals avoided it all the same. To Daniel, though, it was the perfect setting for one final adventure before the end of summer scattered them to different colleges and jobs. They arrived at dusk, parking just beyond the rusted chain-link fence. Vines had crawled up and over the metal, and the sign still hanging from the gate read Crescent County Fair, summer fun for all ages. The letters were faded, some melted into unrecognizable shapes from the fire. A breeze rattled the loose hinges, filling the silence with a hollow clang. "Creepy enough for you?" asked Marcus, his grin forced. He was the loud one of the group, always joking when nervous. "Perfect," Daniel said, swinging his backpack over his shoulder. He carried a flashlight, bottled water, and his camera. He wanted to film everything, to capture the mood of the forgotten carnival. Kayla and Aaron followed reluctantly. Kayla clutched her hoodie tight against her, eyes darting. Aaron walked with arms crossed, her face unreadable, though she kept close to Daniel. They climbed the fence easily enough and landed inside. The fairgrounds spread out before them like a graveyard. Rides stood skeletal against the bruised sky, Ferris wheel unmoving, carousel horses frozen mid-gallop with chipped paint, roller coaster tracks rusted through. Booths sagged under broken beams, prizes still dangling, their plush fabric matted with mildew. The smell was faintly sour, like old ash and mold. They wandered deeper, their voices echoing too loudly in the stillness. Daniel filmed everything, panning across the Ferris wheel as the sun slipped lower. He caught glimpses of old signage, faded murals, and the yawning mouths of funhouse entrances. The deeper they went, the quieter it grew, as though the whole world had retreated from this place. Even the cicadas had stopped their late summer chorus. They came upon the burned section near the midway. Charred wood still stood in jagged rows, booths collapsed into piles of blackened rubble. The air smelled faintly of smoke, as if the fire had happened yesterday, not 10 years before. Daniel crouched and filmed the ground. That was when he noticed the melted shoes. Half a pair, the rubber warped and twisted, still stuck to a patch of scorched earth. Jesus, Kayla muttered, stepping back. We shouldn't be here. Marcus laughed nervously. Relax, it's just old junk. Adds to the atmosphere, but Daniel didn't laugh. He zoomed in on the shoe, unease creeping into his stomach. He didn't say it aloud, but it didn't look like just any discarded trash. It looked like whoever wore it hadn't walked away. They moved on, sticking closer together now. The sun sank behind the tree line, and shadows stretched long across the broken rides. Daniel kept filming, though his hands shook slightly. They reached the funhouse at the far end of the grounds. The paint had peeled away, leaving only faint outlines of clowns and mirrors. The entrance was warped, its doors hanging askew. Bet you won't go inside, Marcus said, nudging Daniel. Daniel smirked despite the unease. You're coming too, they all agreed, though Kayla protested. Inside, the smell was worse, dampness mixed with old smoke. The floor groaned beneath their weight, threatening collapse. The mirrors that still stood were cracked, warped, reflecting them in twisted, elongated shapes. Daniel's flashlight beam swept over one mirror, and for an instant he froze. His reflection smiled back, but he wasn't smiling. His reflection's mouth stretched wider, exposing teeth too sharp, too many. He blinked, and it was gone, just his pale, nervous face staring back. Did you see that? He whispered. See what? Erin asked, her voice tight. He shook his head quickly. Nothing. They pressed deeper, winding through narrow halls. The silence grew suffocating. Then the laughter began, faint, hollow, childlike. It echoed off the walls, impossible to place. Kayla clutched Daniel's arm, eyes wide. Marcus whispered, That's not funny, man. I didn't do anything. Daniel hissed. The laughter swelled, rising and falling like someone running in circles around them. Then it stopped. Total silence again. When Daniel raised his flashlight, the beam caught on something smeared across the wall. Black handprints. Small, like those of children, pressed in clusters, leading deeper into the maze. The prints glistened wetly, as if freshly made. Kayla began to cry softly, muttering that she wanted to leave. But before they could turn back, Erin pointed. Look. At the end of the hall, a figure stood. Small, hunched. A child, maybe 8 or 9, in a burned, tattered dress. Her face was obscured by shadows, but the eyes, 2 gleaming orbs, shone unnaturally in the beam of the flashlight. No one moved. No one breathed. Then the child tilted her head, and her mouth opened in a soundless scream. The lights in the funhouse flickered on all at once. Bulbs long dead sputtered to life, casting everything in sickly carnival hues. Calliope music blared, warped and screeching. The mirrors reflected not them but dozens of children, faces blackened with soot, mouths open in silent agony. Kayla bolted, screaming. Marcus followed. Erin grabbed Daniel's hand, yanking him after them. They ran through the twisting corridors, the music growing louder, the mirrors shattering one by one as if something was crashing through them. The laughter returned, now layered, dozens of voices overlapping. They burst out the other side of the funhouse into the cool night air, gasping. But the fairgrounds had changed. The rides that had once stood still now moved in jerky, unnatural rhythms. The Ferris wheel turned slowly. Its cabin swinging through the machinery was rusted solid. The carousel spun, horses galloping in place, their glass eyes glowing faintly. The roller coaster cars rattled along broken tracks, vanishing into the dark. The four of them stood frozen, unable to process it. Then the air filled with the screams of children, dozens of voices rising from every corner of the fairgrounds. Figures emerged in flickering glimpses, burned silhouettes darting between booths, climbing the rides, crawling across the ground. "Run!" Daniel shouted. They sprinted toward the fence, but the midway stretched longer than before, as if the grounds had expanded. The booths repeated, rides appearing where they hadn't been. Every turn led them deeper instead of out. Kayla tripped, and Marcus hauled her up, but something clawed at her ankle, leaving deep scratches before she kicked free. They ran until their lungs burned, the screams following, the calliope music echoing everywhere. Finally, they stumbled upon the gate where they'd entered. Relief surged. Marcus reached it first and grabbed the chain link, but as he did, his skin sizzled. He screamed and tore his hands back, blisters already forming. The metal glowed faintly red, impossibly hot. They couldn't leave. Daniel raised his camera, desperate, as if proof would make it real. Through the lens, he saw the fairgrounds as they truly were. Not deserted, not decayed, but alive. The booths stood bright, painted fresh. The rides gleamed. The midway was packed with people, families, children, workers, laughing, eating, riding. But every face was wrong. Too pale, eyes hollow. Smiles stretched wide. And as Daniel lowered the camera, the illusion remained. Kayla screamed. Aaron clutched Daniel's arm. Marcus swore under his breath, voice breaking. The crowd turned toward them in unison, hundreds of heads swiveling. The music swelled louder, deafening. The fair had come back to life, and it wanted them inside forever. In the last days of August, when the cicadas began to fade and the evening air hinted at fall, Melissa took a house-sitting job outside a small town in Maine. The owners, an older couple, had gone south for a late summer cruise and wanted someone to keep an eye on the property. It was a large, creaking Victorian on the edge of a dense forest with narrow windows and a tower that overlooked the yard. Melissa thought of it as easy money: feed the cat, water the plants, check the mail. She was starting her senior year of college in a week and wanted the extra cash. Besides, she liked the idea of solitude, time away from people before the semester began. The first night was quiet. She sat in the tower room with the windows open, reading while the cat prowled lazily across the furniture. The trees whispered in the wind, and the lake beyond the woods caught the faint reflection of the moon. But as she drifted towards sleep, she noticed something strange. The house seemed to settle in a way that was too deliberate. The creaks weren't random. They came in patterns like footsteps circling the upstairs hall. She got up, flashlight in hand, and found nothing. Still, the sound lingered even after she lay down again, faint but constant. The second night was colder. Melissa made tea, wrapped herself in a blanket, and stayed downstairs watching TV. Around midnight, she noticed the reflection in the glass cabinet across the room. The TV's glow should have shown her sitting alone on the couch, but in the reflection, she wasn't alone. A second figure sat beside her, tall and thin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. She whipped around, heart pounding, but the couch was empty. When she looked back at the glass, the reflection was gone. She tried to laugh it off, telling herself it was a trick of the light. But when she climbed the stairs to bed, she smelled something faint. Damp earth, like freshly dug soil. The smell followed her into the bedroom. She checked the cat's litter box, the kitchen, even the basement door, but the odor seemed to seep from the walls themselves. That night, the creaks grew louder, and she swore she heard breathing just outside her bedroom door. On the third night, she dreamed of the tower room. In the dream, the windows were wide open, though the wind didn't stir. Instead, dozens of pale hands reached in through the frames, clawing at the air, grasping for her. She woke gasping, her sheets damp with sweat. The cat hissed from the corner, staring at the door. Melissa sat up, listening. The creaking had stopped. Instead, there was a low whisper, like voices just beyond the threshold, too muffled to make out but urgent. She grabbed her phone, but there was no service. The house stood miles from town, surrounded by trees, and she remembered the owners telling her reception was unreliable. She She almost laughed at the thought of running into the woods in the middle of the night just to find a signal. But when the whispering grew louder, she nearly considered it. By morning, the smell of soil was stronger. She traced it to the basement door. The owners had told her not to worry about it. Just a storage space, nothing important. But the odor leaked from the cracks around the doorframe, thick and damp. She unlocked it with trembling hands and descended the narrow staircase. The air grew colder the farther she went, the smell almost choking. The basement was cluttered with boxes, furniture covered in sheets, and shelves of canned goods long past expiration. But in the far corner, she saw something that made her stop. A patch of dirt. Not the cement floor like the rest, but raw earth, freshly disturbed. The soil was dark, damp, and uneven, as if someone had been digging. A half-buried shovel leaned against the wall. Melissa backed up quickly, slamming the door and locking it. She tried to calm herself, telling herself the owners must have been doing some kind of renovation, but the thought didn't stick. The dirt had looked too fresh. And when she returned that night to bed, she dreamed again, this time of a figure rising from that patch of soil. Its face half-rotted, its mouth whispering her name. On the fourth day, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She kept glancing toward the tower windows, certain someone was standing there. But when she checked, the room was empty. That night, she heard the creaking footsteps again, moving slowly up the tower stairs. She waited, holding her breath, until they stopped just outside the tower door. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Then 3 slow knocks. Melissa didn't move. She didn't answer. She just sat frozen until the cat darted under the bed, fur bristling. Then the door creaked open on its own, swinging wide. The room was empty, but the smell of soil flooded in, thick and wet. She barely slept. By morning, she decided to leave. She packed her bag, grabbed the cat, and headed for the car parked in the gravel drive. But when she turned the key, the engine wouldn't start. She tried again and again. The dashboard flickered, then went black. She sat shaking, the cat meowing in distress, before retreating back inside. The house seemed to breathe when she re-entered, the air heavier, the walls groaning. She called the owners from the landline, but the line was dead. She tried again, listening closely, and heard something faint, not a dial tone, but a whisper. Her own name. That night, she couldn't bring herself to sleep. She stayed in the living room, flashlight on, staring at the basement door. Around midnight, she heard it open. The hinges groaned, slow and deliberate. She shone the beam, but the door stood still, closed tight. Yet the smell poured out stronger than ever. The whispering rose again, this time clearly from beneath the floor. Voices layered over each other, moaning, calling, begging. The floorboards trembled faintly under her feet. Then she heard the scraping, something moving beneath the soil, something climbing. Melissa screamed and ran to the front door, fumbling with the lock, but it wouldn't budge. No matter how she twisted, it stayed sealed. She ran upstairs instead, clutching the cat to her chest, and barricaded herself in the tower room. The windows rattled as if hands pounded against them from outside. The door shook on its hinges, the same 3 knocks echoing through the wood. She pressed herself into the corner, sobbing, flashlight beam flickering. For a moment, the knocks stopped. The silence returned, thicker than before. She dared to hope it was over, but when she looked at the mirror hanging crooked on the wall, she saw the truth. In the reflection, the room wasn't empty. Dozens of figures stood around her, rising from the floorboards, their skin caked with soil, their eyes hollow sockets. They surrounded her in silence, mouths moving without sound. And behind them, in the far corner, the tallest one of all. Its head tilted, its grin wide, its hand outstretched toward her shoulder. Melissa spun around, but the room was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, the hand was inches from her neck. The flashlight died. The room plunged into darkness, and the whispering voices filled her ears, louder than ever, until they drowned out her own scream. Thanks so much for watching. If this story gave you chills, please give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe for more true horror stories just like this one. And let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories below. Stay safe out there and lock your doors.